Good morning. And we're 3 days away from the ending of Black History Month. So on the 28th, that would be Saturday, Black History will be over. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the United Nations, who they are, and their influence here in Canada. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of history about who the United Nations are. So the United Nations, they're an international organization. They were founded in 1945. That's a long time ago. Um, Let me tell you a bit about the United Nations. So they were founded in 1945, and they are composed of 193 member states that are designed to maintain international peace and security and develop friendly relations among nations and promote social progress, human rights, keep that word in your head, and better living standards. So, what that means for Canadians is that Canada was a founding member. So, Canada sees the United Nations as a cornerstone of the foreign policy here, and they used it to advance national interests through sorry, multilateral cooperation, peacekeeping, and the promotion of a rules-based international system. Yeah. So let me tell you what kind of influence the United Nations has. So they did influence the framework around the implementation of anti-Semitism policies in Canada, like the law against engaging in anti-Semitism, sorry. And they also did influence the implementation of laws surrounding the rewriting of the Human Rights Act in Canada to implement laws to give protection to the LGBTQ community. So they rewrote that entire law. So in 2017, they wrote a report. It's called, let me tell you, just give me a moment. I should have been more prepared, but I'm going to find that for you right now. So in 2017, they basically wrote a report. So this was 9 years ago, and it was a documentation demonstrating that Black people in Canada do face deeply entrenched systemic anti-Black racism, xenophobia, and Afrophobia. So, what that report did, it highlighted that in Canada, racism is functionally normalized in institutions like school, employment, housing, health, and definitely in the justice system. So, their key findings from that report found that anti-Black racism, sorry about that, is deeply entrenched in Canadian institutions, policies, practices, and it's actually invisible to the dominant group. The dominant group being the palm colored hand people. So also the key findings in the report, um, you know, found that in the criminal justice system, Black Canadians are overrepresented. One of their major focus was the imbalanced representation of Black people in the Canadian criminal justice system, and including high rates of carding and incarceration, and also in economic inequality. The report pointed to significant gaps in employment and economic opportunities, and they also noted a lack of adequate disaggregate sorry, I have a cold, excuse me, disaggregated data to address these disparities. So that report 9 years ago, written by the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, they made some recommendations. So they urged the Canadian government to take concrete steps, including implementing the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent, addressing the overrepresentation in the justice system, and also improving data collection. So that was 9 years ago. What has happened for us since then? We still face being overrepresented in the Canadian justice system. We still see gaps in employment opportunities for Black people living in Canada. We definitely witness the abuse of Black people by law enforcement every day since the report was written and the recommendations rolled out. We still see that going on and on. The question is, what do we see different for our people? Now, I want you to remember what I said to you at the start of this video. The United Nations influenced the rewriting of the Canadian Human Rights Act. They rewrote that act to make sure that the LGBTQ community had protection through that act, that they didn't have to face homophobia and what have you. They revamped it and wrote it over again. We know that there are laws against anti-Semitism in Canada. It is in the book of legislation. There are laws. Despite that report, despite the recommendations, what law is there that's specific, that protects Black people living in Canada from anti-Black racism? Every time a Black life is lost, a law officer is found justified. Every time a Black person faces inequality on the job place or inequity, it's always swept under the rug. The Canadian government spent more than $100,000 fighting against Nicholas Thompson when he brought forth that lawsuit against the Human Rights Commission and the inequities in the Employment Equity Act. What do you think, that the LGBTQ community and the Jewish community just sat down and said, okay, UN, you do it for us? No, they got up, they fought, they protested, they brought forth petitions, and their quest for law to be passed that their people not face discrimination, marginalization, and validated and permissible persecution. It was a continuous fight. But our people, this is the ending of Black History Month, and I want to ask you, what have we done? Even in the light, oh, it's Black History Month, we haven't made a step to make things better for ourselves. Instead, we continue to fight publicly. We continue to show the world that we don't know what it takes or what it means to be united Nothing has changed for us. It doesn't matter what reports they're going to write. They're going to write it. They're going to say the words that sounds okay, but it is up to us to fight that fight. And if the LGBTQ community, the Jewish community, the indigenous community can work together and not apart and not fight each other for popularity, fame, clout, and spotlight and make the government change the law, why can't we? We already know the government that governs us. They know, they acknowledge that anti-Black racism exists in this country. But what do we as a people do to fight? Fight for our rights, not just for the here and now, but for the generations coming up after us. It's going to be the same thing day in and day out. It shouldn't be called Black History Month because nothing about the predicament of our people is historical. It's the same way now as it is back then. Uncle Tom's in the cabin. Uncle Tom's working in the house. A friend of mine and I, we had a good laugh yesterday. We said, it only takes giving a Black person an extension number and a key card, and it goes to their head. They forget where they're coming from. They forget the people that they said, forget them. We're out of that now. But it's only for a time. Because at the end of the day, when people address us as you people includes me, you, your neighbor, the person you hate that looks just like you. When they say you people, it includes me and it includes you. I'm going to share a video with you. It says, Canada offers words but not action when it comes to anti-Black racism. This is coming from the author who wrote that United Nations report. You know, it's appreciated when people fight for us, but we have to fight for ourselves. And that is something I would love to see. And I'm sure I speak for many out there who want to see disunity as a thing of the past. That we say, well, it was part of Black history, but we stand proud and together now. Because I'm tired of saying it over and over. Until we get to that point, even if we take training classes on how to unite and love each other, something's got to give. The longer we stand divided, is the more anti-Black racism will continue and continue and continue. The LGBTQ, they fought together. The Jewish community together. The indigenous community together. We are the only ones that think, okay, Black people united for change is going to do this. We don't need them. Forget working with them or the other Black organizations that ride solo like Stag Lee. It ain't going to work. I'm sorry to say, but strength come in numbers. Think back since it's Black History Month. Go to Google and type in the March on Washington Hill. Jim Crow had to step off and back off and pass that civil rights movement when they saw 260,000 Black and white people marching on that hill. And if it wasn't for those 260,000 people getting up and marching together, today, Black people couldn't vote. They had to pass the civil rights movement. Yeah, Martin Luther King, he was the face of that Civil Rights Act being passed. But you know what? If he didn't have the 259,000 people behind him as he led that march, it wouldn't be possible that any Black voice be heard. I hope you remember this and change the history of Black history. I'll let you listen to this quickly before I go. There we go.
In the US in police custody and the wave of protests that followed have sparked discussions about systemic racism in this country.
Let me pull that out.
The death of George Floyd in the US in police custody and the wave of protests that followed have sparked discussions about systemic racism in this country. In fact, though, a report from 3 years ago laid out Canada's situation in pretty stark terms. The UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent concluded in part that it is deeply concerned by the structural racism that lies at the core of many Canadian institutions and the systemic anti-Black racism that continues to have a negative impact on the human rights situation of African Canadians. That was in 2017. The report came with dozens of recommendations, like a nationwide mandatory policy on the collection of racial data, and that the government address anti-Black racism in the criminal justice system. So how else does that report speak to current issues? Dominic Day is the vice chair of the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. She joins us now from New York City. Hi, Ms. Day. It's great to have you with us on the program.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it very much. I have to say that it's been very fascinating to read through that report in light of current events, in light of the discussion that's taking place in this country. What do you think the most important conclusion reached in the report is, given what's happening right now?
I guess I would say a couple things. The keeping of disaggregated data so we can pinpoint the areas of racial discrimination and violence where we're seeing both racial disparities and real opportunities to improve, and the absolute urgency of focusing on racial profiling and the targeting of people of African descent in the criminal justice system, which is sidelining the generations of excellence out of legacy systems of racial control. But I will say it's a very robust report.
It is.
There's a wide variety.
Yeah, that's why I asked you to highlight a few, because I feel like it is incredibly robust. I think everyone should read it because it's also very informative. But I think there are some big takeaways, especially in light of, for example, the conversation right now, even around COVID-19 and whether that disaggregated data is being collected. It's not, for the most part, in this country. I'm wondering what your assessment is on the way in which this country and the federal government in this country have responded in the 3 years since that report.
Well, obviously we haven't done a follow-up report yet. I think we hope to do that in a few years. But what we've seen is some really wonderful language. There's been talk about systemic racism at the federal level. We've seen some provinces really talking about how to grapple with this. We haven't necessarily seen the resources or the political will to actually implement this. So when we're talking about how do you implement a recommendation, it's not really about who you hire or even how much money you allocate. It's about the outcomes and how do you measure change? How do you measure commitment through the outcomes to the impacted communities? And that seems to be absent at this time from the ways they're thinking about, the ways that Canada is thinking about looking at the 2019 anti-racism strategy, looking at the implementation of the International Decade for People of African Descent. We have to look at the outcomes to the impacted community far more than who gets hired in which position.
If I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, accountability is important. Like there has to be a mechanism to figure out if what you're doing is actually having the desired impact.
Absolutely. The community itself, the experience of the impacted communities has to drive our understanding of what's adequate. It's not enough to give training to somebody. You actually need to make sure that people on the street are experiencing improvement and equality and justice.
There are still some politicians at the provincial level, one in particular in Quebec, who deny that systemic racism exists. And I'm wondering to what degree that is an impediment to doing what you just laid out.
It's the biggest impediment in the world. If nothing else, institutions that have been identified and proven through research as perpetrators of institutional racism have the absolute obligation to educate themselves, to understand this, and to really dive into collecting data and understanding which racial disparities are driving ongoing discrimination. So I've seen the statements that, oh, I don't understand why people use this word discrimination. It's a few bad apples. It's not a few bad apples. That's what we're seeing around the world right now. But more importantly, understanding how systemic racism operates, including in policing, including in facilitating impunity, right? The impunity to end Black lives, understanding that is actually part of your job as a politician, as a police commander, as a person who is a servant to the public, as a representative of the government.
I think, and I've listened very closely.
You heard what she said. The people on the streets, we're the people on the streets, unless you're sitting in the House of Commons or the Legislative Assembly buildings. We are those people on the street. In 2017, we should have taken that report and pressed them to change. The solution is just like what Martin Luther King said. We can't stop them from hating us, but the law can restrain them. The law can hold those officers accountable, those racist teachers, those racist employers. The law can do all of that because it's done that for the LGBTQ, the indigenous, and the Jewish communities who were once almost as marginalized as we remain today. But at the end of the day, the difference between those three groups, they got up, they got together, and they got to fighting. And it's about time that next year, that when we're celebrating Black history, that we could say, yeah, last year, Black people in Canada, in North America, got together and didn't take their foot off that gas pedal, fighting as one people for our rights. Think about that. And do just what, like that lady said, go read the report. A lot of us can relate, but we cannot. Change won't ever come into play until we change the disunity among us.